this short lecture, I want to talk about transcendence. Now, transcendence is a curious concept. On the one hand, if you ask most people how they experience transcendence, they'll tell you something that's rather sublime. So I feel transcendence when I'm like hiking in nature, or I feel transcendence when I'm hugging my family, or I feel transcendence when I'm dancing with my friends. This experience of effervescent radiance, this feeling of glow and interconnectedness to those around us. It's a feeling of being kind of more than our ordinary mundane existence. But if you ask most people how they achieve transcendence, they'll tell you something different. They'll say, well, transcendence is what I'll do once I get that great house, or once I get that great job, or once I meet that perfect person. In other words, we often think that transcendence is something that we have to achieve or that we have to get as a reward for doing all the right things. So there's this discordance between, on the one hand, the way we experience transcendence, which is always in the moment, and the way that we want to gain transcendence, which is always in the future. And this begs a real interesting question about why our self-processes make us think that transcendence is something that's going to happen far and far away. As I've mentioned before, if you want to understand how your self-processes operate, we need to go and look at these various layers of our existence. At our very core, within each of our cells, is a cellular self. And it's doing what all cells around the world are doing. They're resisting entropy and keeping the life force going. And they're doing this with a combination of DNA and cellular structures and cellular processes. And they're keeping that vitality burning in their metabolic action and their reproductive action. Ensconcing this in sort of a next layer of being is our animal self. It's where the trillions of cells that comprise us come together and act as one. And it's in this that we see our physiology, we see our psychology, and most importantly, what we see the animal self doing is two things. It's trying to generate maps of reality and make predictions about what's going to happen next based on those maps. And this is really what thinking and feeling are all about. It's us mapping the moment and anticipating what's going to happen next in order to figure out what we want to do. Of course, we're not just animals, we're humans, and what distinguishes us as humans is our language. And so the next layer of our being is this linguistic self. And what the linguistic self is there to do is to take a new way of interacting with reality based on things that we synthesize. So we generate concepts, we generate laws, we generate technologies. We construct for ourselves a whole new way of interfacing with the world. And ostensibly what this is doing is taking the maps that our animal self is generating and giving labels to them, and it's taking the predictions that our animal self is giving and assigning probabilities to them. Then the next layer of being, after our linguistic self, is this egoistic self. What the egoistic self is there to do is to help us acquire the things that we want most from those around us, which is respect, admiration, and love. And the way the egoistic self does this is by constructing a set of identities and stories about the self and situating us within them. Most of the time, the egoistic self is what dominates our conscious awareness. We get typically caught up in our stories of the day and our feeling of ourself in this very sense of being. But that's not where our selves end. For there's another layer of being, and if you look at the world's great religious traditions, its philosophical systems, and even modern research in psychology, they all say something else, that there's something more to us than simply our egos. And this is what I call the transcendent self. And the transcendent self is about reconciling all the problems and imbalances in our other layers of being. As I've mentioned before, all of our selves, no matter what their layers, are having to do two things. On the one hand, they're having to express their vitality. We are energy systems after all, and so we want this energy that's within us to flow. But they also need to have order. They need to structure the flow of this energy. At a cellular level, this structure comes in our DNA and our cellular structures. With our animal cells, it comes with our routines of behavior, our psychology. At a linguistic self, it happens with our laws and our cultures. With our egoistic self, ordering comes with these stories that we tell about ourselves, the labels that we give ourselves, our names, our identities, all the things that we think that are so intrinsic to who we are. And that's all well and good, except a lot of the time these ordering systems come in conflict with one another. So what our egoistic self or what our linguistic self tells us is maybe very different from what our animal self wants to do. Or more importantly, a lot of the things that come from our linguistic self and our egoistic self misappropriate our energy. So we spend a lot of time directing our energies in ways that are really unproductive or not helpful for us. We spend a lot of energy in anxiety or feeling guilt or feeling resentful. Basically, these neurotic states that are completely inappropriate to the moment at hand. And so what the transcendent self is trying to do is to dissolve these imbalances in our self processes. And by dissolving these imbalances in our self processes, it unlocks a kind of deeper and luminescent radiance that's within us. Now the question is how do we go about doing this? We are very complicated beings. These various layers of the self are very complex. And oftentimes they're so ensconced within us that it's hard to see out of them. It's actually even hard to see them for what they are. And so what we're going to be doing over the next couple of lectures is talking about how we might understand the processes of transcendence. And we're going to start with probably the first systematic way that humans started thinking about transcendence, and that's with Buddhism.